Hello, my name's Jade and today we're going to be talking about the books that I read in January. I read 11 books so far in January. It's January 31st. I'm hoping to finish one more by the end of today. But 11 books, possibly 12, is a really big number for me. I've never read that many books in a month, I don't think, before. And a variety of different books as well. It's a really good start to the year. Yeah, let's get into it. The first book I finished this year was The 100 Nights of Hero by Isabel Greenberg. I technically started this one in December, but I finished it early January. This is a graphic novel. I don't know how I would synopsize this. From the author who brought you the Encyclopedia of Early Earth comes another epic tale of daring do. Prepare to be dazzled once more by the overwhelming power of stories and see love prevail in the face of terrible adversity. You will read of betrayal, loyalty, madness, bad husbands, lovers both faithful and unfaithful, wise old crones, moons who came out of the sky, musical instruments that won't stay quiet, friends and brothers and fathers and mothers, and above all, many, many sisters. It's got stories within stories within stories within stories. I realised it was stories within stories, but then I stopped and I was like, hang on a second, how many stories and stories is there? And I think I counted 4 at one point. Love and people is such a big theme. It's a different world with a different religion system and a different lands with different ways of living. There's one that comes before this that I have not finished yet. But I think it's okay reading this one without having read the first one. I wasn't confused at all. Maybe you might get more out of it if you had read the other one first. And relationships and love is such a big thing, and the power of stories is such a big theme. It's got a great feministy line running through it as well. It's really beautifully written. There were so many lines in here that were so beautiful and that just made me stop and appreciate, wow, that was beautiful. It was really quirky and funny as well. I laughed out loud quite a few times. It had this like really self-aware, chatty quirkiness to it. It was so interesting and different. If you like graphic novels, I highly recommend this one. I think this might be my favourite graphic novel I've read thus far. Discounted like series of graphic novels, like standalone. I'd give The 100 Nights of Hero like a 10 out of 10. The only thing I'd say is I wasn't obsessed with the art, but it was still really stunning. It was so powerful and beautiful. Really enjoyed it. The next book I read this month was called Doggy by Derek Landy. I talked in my 2020 wrap-up video about how I wanted to read all of these throughout 2021, and so I kind of accidentally just started. I knew that I wanted to read this one in January to like get a start on it, and I kind of just picked up and started reading it and got hooked and read 100 pages in a night. I read this so quickly. This series was one of my favourite growing up. I started it when I was probably 12, 13, and I read on up until maybe 16, 17 when I just stopped reading them, and I don't know why. I never read book 8 or 9 in this original series, not read any of the new ones, so I really wanted to reread the ones I'd read and then finally read 8 and 9. I'm not necessarily worried about reading the new ones yet. We'll see how I feel when we come to that stage. I had so much fun with it. It was so nostalgic. I was worried that it wasn't gonna live up to how I remembered it being, but it did. It did have that kind of silly childishness children's books have. There were some things that was a little bit like but like I didn't mind at all. What I was amazed by was how funny it was, because I remembered them being so funny, like laugh out loud, constantly funny. The characters are so snarky and the dialogue is so great, but I laughed out loud so many times. It was so reassuring that it was still funny to me. I love being back in this world. I love being back with these characters. It was a blast. I had a blast. If you haven't read this series, I highly recommend it. It's about a skeleton detective called Doggy who kind of solves these crimes, and they have bigger connections than they may seem. And there's magic, there's adepts, and there's elementals, and there are different branches of magic, and elementals can control the elements, and adepts have a whole huge different variety of powers. And with each book, the world becomes bigger and the story becomes more intense. And each book, I feel like, gets better. So it's really reassuring knowing how much fun I had, but I knew reading this the whole time that it gets better, so I wasn't expecting this to be the best thing ever. I would give it like an 8 out of 10. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. The next book I read was Meander, Spiral, Explode by Jane Eyre. This is a writing craft novel. It's all about narrative structures other than the typical hero's journey, typical hero's arc that we got from ancient Greek tragedies, essentially, I think. And it's all about different narrative structures that you could use that are less common. And I found that so interesting. I'm not great at plotting. Playing around with different narrative structures is definitely something I would be interested in doing. And it gave examples of like books and broke down how the books structured themselves and gave like references and quotes of books. So it was all really well explained and I understood everything. It was really well organized. Like each different type of structure is broken down into a chapter at a time. So if you wanted to go back and reference this, I think it'd be really easy to do. For like a writing craft non-fiction, found it quite enjoyable and really easy to read. So I really liked this one. I'm really glad to have read it. I'm definitely going to come back to it. So if narrative structure is in any way interesting to you, I definitely recommend this one. I really enjoyed it. I would give it like a solid 8 or 9 out of 10, both for enjoyment and the content, the quality of it. Next up, I read Adele by Leila Slimani. She wrote Lullaby, which was a thriller that I had to read for my undergrad, and I knew that I wanted to pick up anything else she wrote. I knew that this was being published in the UK soon. It had already come out in France. These are translated texts, if you didn't know. They take place in Paris, both of them. Both of them are really thought-provoking. Lullaby was so interesting. You go into it knowing what happens, how it ends up, and so it's more about how do we get here. It has so much social commentary, and this one I found the same. The writing is really clean. I think it was more descriptive in Lullaby, but I think it's very purposeful. The description of this, it can be quite bare, but it's very purposeful, getting the effect of the main character. I'm going to read you the synopsis because I don't know how I'd summarize it, and I wouldn't recommend looking at the whole thing because the end of it is a spoiler. Adele appears to have the perfect life. A respected journalist, she lives in a flawless Parisian apartment with her surgeon husband and their young son. Beneath the veneer of having it all, Adele is bored and consumed by an insatiable need for sex, whatever the cost. Struggling to contain the twin forces of compulsion and desire, she begins to orchestrate her life around her one-night stands and extramarital affairs, arriving late to work and lying to her husband about where she's been. Spoiler, don't read the last line. An erotic and daring story with electrically clear writing, Adele will captivate readers with its exploration of addiction, sexuality, and woman's quest to feel alive. I love the theme of what we expect from women and what we expect from wives and what we expect of mothers. The pressures that puts on this person and the way she deals with it. The writing doesn't have any judgment, and it just felt so clever to me while reading it. There's so many really great foreshadowings and ironies. Characters felt really real. The ending just left me reeling. Some may argue it's a little bland, and I would understand why, but personally I just found it really fascinating. I flew through it. There's an article from The Guardian and The Independent that I had to read immediately after, and if you're interested I'll leave them down below. It feels like a thriller the way it's written, because the fear of being caught, and it's so enticing, and if it at all sounds interesting to you, I'd recommend picking it up. I would give it an 8 out of 10, I'd say, just because it didn't knock my socks off or anything. Then I read Scott Doggy Pleasant Playing with Fire, the second book of the series, and I had just as much fun reading this one. I don't know if I prefer the first one a little bit just because it's the first one. This one has a lot of really iconic parts, and what I mean by that is there's like random parts that really stuck with me, like the shoelace part where Scuddery is explaining about tiny shoelaces. Going through all these like really iconic moments that I remember and love so well was really exciting. I just don't think because it's not the first one I have the same amount of respect and love for it, but I still had a blast. I'd still give it like a 7.5, 8 out of 10, and I'm very excited to read the third one. I'm very excited to have read 2 in 1 month though. That's ahead of schedule. The next book I read was First You Write a Sentence by Jo Moran. This one, as well as Meander, Spiral, Explode, were both recommended to me from a lecturer at uni. I'm doing an MA in creative writing. This one I found a little bit less useful than the other, only because I already knew some of the advice in here. I previously to my MA had did an undergrad in creative writing as well, so I feel like if you're a beginner in writing, I definitely recommend it. There are just some things that like I knew that. Whether I implement them or not is one thing. For a book that's all about writing clearly, getting your point across in a good manner, it felt a little waffly at times to me, and it felt quite dense. Like I struggled with this one more than I struggled with Meander, Spiral, Explode. I just didn't like it as much as the other one. It was just the balance of like trying to make you care about sentences versus like teaching you how to write a sentence. It was a little weird to me. I still learned from it. I still think it's a worthwhile read if you want to write. So I'm not saying by any means it was a waste of time or I hated it or don't read it. And we are talking about a lot of like very technical writing stuff in this one more so. I'd give this one more of like a 7 out of 10, I think. The next book I read was one of my required texts for the next trimester. I'm doing a module about the love story, and so the first book I read was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I had read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte before, and I didn't love it, but I had a lot of respect for it. I really loved going through it and analysing it, and I think if I reread it today, I might have a different opinion on it. Most of the books I've read from that period I've not loved because of the writing style. It felt quite dense and foreign to me, but I really enjoyed this one. There were some slow parts, the beginning chunk and then the chunk with the rivers, they were a little bit slower for me, but I found myself getting really invested in the relationship in this. I teared up a few times, that's how invested I was, and I laughed. I loved the feminist ideas in here. There are so many that are still relevant today, which is kind of sad. I loved the point when she was talking about how women are often deemed to be emotional. I can't remember exactly what she said, but it reminds me of the song Mad Woman by Taylor Swift, and it's still something today, like women deemed as overreacting and getting overly emotional. I have also read Wide Cigar Associé, I read that a couple years ago now, and I really loved that one. And if you don't know about it, it's about one of the characters in this one. It's a prequel. I don't want to say who. It's a very famous thing, and I feel like I knew about this plot element. If I didn't, I would have enjoyed the mystery aspect of it more. I loved that gothic theme that ran through this and the mystery theme. I tried very much to keep Wide Cigar Associé out of my head to give everyone like a clear slate, give them all a chance in this one. I enjoyed Rochester more than I expected to. I will say I think the audiobook helped me with this one a little bit because I audiobooked it, and I think I got through it really quickly and really easily because of that. If you're struggling with text from this period, I highly recommend audiobooks. Every time I've used an audiobook, it's helped. Yeah, I'd give this one like a 9 or an 8 out of 10. I really respect it. I think it's really clever and I really enjoyed it. The next book I finished was Lore by Alexandra Bracken. I got to watch the Booksplosion live show. I've been following Booksplosion for a while. I really love them. I've been watching them for years and years and years. I don't know why I said a while. And I was gonna read this anyway, and I was very excited that I got to like be a part of the Booksplosion experience. I have a whole video discussing my thoughts on this one coming up relatively soon, I hope. So if you want to know more of my thoughts, go look there. I'll say that I'd give it like a 9 out of 10, I think. It didn't blow me away, but I do think it's so clever. It's an ancient Greece myth retelling type of thing, and I love Alexandra Bracken. I love her books, so I think this one was really, really clever. There were just like a few little annoying things that stopped me from thinking like it was the best thing ever, but I had a lot of fun reading it. Next, I read Hear the World Entire by Anwin Kaya Hayward. This is another ancient Greece retelling type of thing. This follows Medusa and a little bit Perseus as well, and it's kind of about Medusa's backstory and kind of like looking at it from her perspective. Medusa is so often villainized, and this kind of really doesn't look at her like that at all, and it looks about sexual abuse and the effect that could have someone. This is a novella. I'm pretty sure it's self-published. I'm going to leave a link to where you can buy it down below. It's very short. I read it in one sitting. I maybe would like to reread it, or wished I had read it slower because I think I read it so quickly. It didn't sit with me in the way it could have. It didn't impact me in the way it could have potentially. The writing was really, really beautiful in this. There were a few clumsy little things, like technical things that weren't done properly, like the sentence structure often kind of got chaotic and wasn't following grammatical rules. Don't know if that was purposeful, but it was full of potential and it had a lot of really beautiful lines. Honestly, I think I could have read a whole novel following this story. It's so interesting and it's so full of emotion, and there's so many really interesting themes in here. I'm really glad that I read it. Next up was another required text from the love story module, and that was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I'd never read an Austen, so this was my first Austen. I audiobooked this one as well, and thank God. I read it in like 2 days because of that. I didn't love this one as much as I loved Jane Eyre. This one felt a little stuffy in comparison, and I can understand the way some of the things are done, the way the description's done, why it's better. And I watched John Green's Crash Course Literature on it, and it did convert me a little bit to the cleverness of it. I didn't enjoy it as much, and I found it a little like meandery and waffly at times. I don't know, I was invested, I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed Mr. Darcy though. He's like my favourite out of Heathcliff and Mr. Rochester. I ship them so hard. The love aspect on this one's kind of different and interesting, I guess. I will say on it like not being overly romantic and stuff, it is more realistic, I would guess, and it's quite practical. And the last, at least for now, book I read this month was Women Together, Women Apart, yes, by Tzura True Latimer. This is non-fiction. It's about self-portraits of lesbian women in 1920s Paris. 1920s Paris is the time period and place that I'm setting my novel in, and so this was a research text for me. It I'd been recommended it during my undergrad and I started it but I never got around to finish it, so I sat down and I read it. I'm really glad I did. It had so much really interesting and really helpful stuff in it. It is a lot about self-portraits. The last chapter before the conclusion wasn't as strong as the rest, I feel like, and there was one section that just like completely went over my head. But for the most part it was really interesting. I loved reading about the different women in here. I don't know, I'd give this one like a 7 out of 10, I guess. It's hard to rate like non-fiction because like what's the scale? What am I rating this on? Those are all the books that I've read thus far. I am currently in the middle of The Encyclopedia of Early Earth by Isabella Greenberg, the prequel slash, well really it's the one that just came before the 100 Nights of Hero. Not loving this one as much, but it has a lot of the very similar themes, less feminist and less about love, I'd say so far, more about humanity, otherworldliness to it, and about the power of stories. Definitely it's shorter so far, at least the story in that one's bigger. Might be too early to say, I might be speaking too soon. Also, just for the point of saying, I have started Normal People this month. I started it a couple days ago. This is another set text for the love story module. I'm only 30 pages in or so. And I started Daisy Jones and the Six. I'm audiobooking. I started this one like a week ago or so. I'm just over halfway through. I'm really enjoying this so far. I'm really loving it and I'm loving the audiobook experience. If you want to read this one, I definitely recommend audiobooking it. And those were the books that I read in January. Please let me know down below what you read in January. If you read any of the books that I read, if you have any opinions on them, I'd love to know. Thank you so much for watching. My name's Jade. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name is Jade. I did my outro wrong. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye. Story with electricity and I didn't love this one as much as I loved Pride and Prejudice. This is Pride and Prejudice. Daring story with electricity. Oh my god, it's snowing and I'm finding it so hard to concentrate right now. Like it's coming down. Do you want to see the snow? Can you see? Snow! Ah, is it pitching? It's pitching! Oh, you fell.